I'm just realizing now that these are the first words that I'm speaking today, so yeah, my voice might be a bit shaky. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to my first real video of 2024, I think. I already uploaded an interview that I did with 𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔶𝔨𝔢𝔫 a couple of weeks ago, but that was filmed in 2023, so this is the first time I'm filming in the new year, which might say something about the consistency of my filming. Since my last Q&A that I did is already over half a year old, I think, I thought it was time to do a new one, since there are also a lot more people here, so I thought that you guys might have some new questions. So I reached out on Instagram and over the YouTube community tab and asked you guys if there was anything that you would want to ask me as a German folk magic practitioner. So without further ado, let's jump right into the questions. Alice Wilson asks, elaboration on the geography of Germany from an animist lens would be great. I really like this question, but I don't really know how to answer it, but I'll try my best. So, from an animist point of view, you would want to look at the folklore and folkloric tradition of each of the regions in Germany that you're interested in. And they'll likely reflect the people's relationship with animism. Actually, I might just... Is that better? Over a year on YouTube and I still haven't quite figured out my lighting situation, I'm sorry. Anyway, you would want to look at the folklore and see what kind of spirits are reflected in there. I semi-recently reviewed this book on my channel, Hausgeister, fast vergessene Gestalten der deutschen Märchen- und Sagenwelt, and this also is available in English, and it basically covers house spirits as they are imagined in different parts of German folklore. And in there you can already see kind of a animist relationship that the populace had with the natural world. And in their second book, just titled Fabeltiere, tierische Fabelwesen der deutschsprachigen Mythen, Märchen und Sagen, which unfortunately is not yet available in English, they basically talk about the general land spirits as they are imagined in German folklore. So these books would be good for you if you wanted to have a more academic look at the relationship that people have with animism in Germany. However, big themes that pop up throughout the country are corn spirits, or spirits associated with the harvest, and spirits associated with special landmarks or conditions in a landscape. So, for example, a mountain spirit, or in my area particularly water spirits and bog spirits. On the coast it would be ocean spirits and the spirits of the tide, for example. And you can also then take a look at the natural world of Germany through maps. I love maps. Like, maps I feel like are a very underestimated tool for any folk magic practitioner. So you can look at a map and see where are mountains, where are mountainous regions, where are more flat regions, and what is the annual temperature like there, what are the weather patterns like there, where were or are things harvested, what type of agricultural or regular plants grow in what area. And this then in combination with folklore will tell you a lot about animacy in German regions. Okay, second question by 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔶𝔨𝔢𝔫 just Brooms. And yes, of course, I'm very much in support of that. Brooms rock. I don't know if this is supposed to be like questions about how brooms are used in German folk magic, in which case my answer would be basically the same way like in any other form of folk magic. So, for example, sweeping out negative energy, putting a broom upside down near a door to ward off malevolent spirits, and so on. And of course, there is this age-old folkloric motive of the witch riding on a broom to like the witches' gathering. And also, by the way, the person who commented this, 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔢𝔫 is a Croatian folk magic practitioner. So if you are interested in South Slavic or Balkan or specifically Croatian forms of spirituality and folk magic, he would be your destination? Your guy? The person to ask the questions. Yeah, I'll leave his Instagram down below. Next question. 𝔭𝔬𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔢𝔫 asks, irgendwelche Tipps zur Recherche zu deutscher Volksmagie? So, if I have any tips for researching German folk magic. Yes, a lot of them. This is basically all I make my content about. I have a playlist on my channel titled German Folk Magic, where I have all of my videos where I talk about topics pertaining to that, but I also particularly made a video about this exact question. I think it's also titled something like how to research German folk culture, something in the vein of that, and I'll also link that below so you can give that a watch. Next question. Martius Plantius asks, what do you celebrate instead of the Wheel of the Year festivities? I basically hold more to like regional folk celebrations in my personalized Wheel of the Year, and I think I might actually have a list. Hold on a second. I think I have the list somewhere here in my fourth grimoire, and by the way, if you are subscribed to the Beaksel tier or higher on my Patreon, you'll have a tour of this entire grimoire if you're curious about that. Shameless self-plug, I know, but here's the list. So, I have multiple like observances throughout the year, and I more so celebrate seasonal periods instead of one specific day and then no celebration until the next like holiday. So everything kind of blends into each other. Celebrating regional folk practices also comes in hand with Christianity, so you'll see a lot of like Christian holidays on here, but I just do the folk practices associated with them on that day, for example, and that also means that each of these quote-unquote holidays or festivities isn't like this big celebration as, for example, the 8 holidays in the Wiccan Wheel of the Year are. So I celebrate in January the Three Kings holiday, Lechmissen, which is the 2nd of February, 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔢𝔨, the 22nd of February, of course the full moons and new moons, but more specifically the full moons of each year. Maria Verkündung, 25th of March. Fastabend, the 1st of March is a very big celebration, especially in my area. Ash Wednesday, Gründonnerdag, Georgstag, Easter, of course. Walpurgisnacht, the 1st of May, the Ice Saints. Pentecost, Johannistag, then the Ant celebration taking place in August, which I already talked about enough, I feel like. If you don't know exactly what that is, it's like the biggest folk holiday in my village, and I made an entire podcast episode with that with Ella Harrison. I can also link that below. Michaelistag, the 29th of September. All Saints Day, All Souls Day at the end of August and beginning of November. Saint Martin, the 11th of November. Of course, the entire Advent, Santa Claus, 6th of December, the winter solstice, and of course the Rauhnächte taking place from the 24th until the 5th of January. I skipped over some minor holidays, but this is basically the gist of it. For Santa Claus, I posted an infographic on Instagram, and for some of the other holidays, I have posts up on Patreon. As a matter of fact, I think I might already also have some YouTube videos centering some of these celebrations. I'll also try to link them down below. Okay, the next question, which was sent to me privately through my DMs, so I don't know if the person would be comfortable with like me sharing their username, so I'll just read out the question. Mich würde interessieren, ob und wie Queerness deine Spiritualität beeinflusst. Basically, how does being queer influence my spirituality? And I feel like this is a topic that I don't really talk about that often, so you might not be aware, although if you like pay attention, you probably are aware that I'm queer, I am non-binary, I go by they, them pronouns, and I'm not going to like open up this entire can of worm of what non-binary identity is, how they, them pronouns are used and stuff like that. I'm putting that aside and just focus on the question. I think queerness influences me in the way that I often have like a queer point of view when it comes to spirituality. So when I read through, for example, Germanic hero epics, for example, or tales of the gods, or research something in archaeology, I'll always bring that queer lens with me and interpret things in ways which every non-queer individual would maybe not necessarily do. All within reason, of course. I don't randomly make things up, but I do come with a slightly different perspective, which I feel like can also sometimes be valuable. Because there's this tendency in a lot of like, not just spiritual spaces, but also academia that centers around like the pre-Christian past to view said past in a very heteronormative, cisgendered kind of way, and bringing a queer perspective to this could like really put a spotlight on the fact that not everything in the past was like the way that we like structure our society today. So that's one aspect of it. But I also try to make my magic not very gendered. So for example, if you've like been around the witchy online sphere, you'll probably have seen terms floating around like the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and that never really vibed well with me, at least in the way that most people use it. Basically, they project very suspiciously 1950s strict gender roles onto their spirituality with the concept of the divine masculine and feminine. And I've always kind of stayed away from that, so my magic is, like, as I said, not particularly gendered. In some divination practices, like for example the Lenormand cards, this can sometimes be a hassle because that's an explicitly gendered divination system, but I'll find ways to work around that by just, for example, using a signifier card which isn't explicitly masculine or feminine. Yeah, this was a pretty long-winded answer, but I hope that kind of helped. Okay, next question. Anina Melissa asks, could you potentially do a top 10 of German-specific ancient rituals, traditions, etc. in relation to folk magic / witchcraft? I'm not quite sure, because I don't know if something like top 10 rituals would even like make sense conceptually. Like, you wouldn't make a top 10 rituals of Catholicism. Like, maybe you would, but I don't know if this would make sense, putting some rituals on a pedestal over others. And also, I don't know how you would necessarily like separate one ritual from the other. Like, for example, one ritual might be focused on divination but also incorporate some aspects of protection workings. Is that then a protection ritual or a divination ritual? And is it better than a more specific protection ritual? So things are kind of shaky. If I ever do something like this, it would be its own video, because I think that this question is a bit like too like hefty to answer in a Q&A, but I'll definitely keep that question in mind. But just to give you some form of answer, I could probably tell you one of my like favorite rituals, I guess, and it's just my favorite because it's so easy to do, and that's basically just going up to my ancestor altar before I go to bed every night and giving them a little prayer and thanking them for protecting me and watching over me, which is like a way to kind of keep connection to my ancestors and to interact with them at least once for a couple of seconds or minutes every day. So yeah, I know this is probably a very unsatisfying answer, but sorry. Next question. This comes from Runa4589. Aside from figuring out what regions a person's German ancestors were from, what advice can you give to a person who is trying to reconnect to German folk magic? And then they also ask about specifically South German folk magic resources. I'm from the Northwest, which means I do not know that much about South German folk magic. So it would be interesting to kind of compare notes with a South German folk magic practitioner on that. I think I also answered this question before, but I will say that learning the German language or the local dialect can really go a long way when you try to research German folk magic, because a lot of sources will only be in that language / dialect. And also, if you have the opportunity to do so ever, I would highly recommend the region of Germany that you take your folk magic from, or try to take your folk magic from, and just get a feeling for the land, like for the land spirits, for the weather, for the landscape, and really immerse yourself in it. What does it feel like? To kind of put your fingers onto the pulse of the earth in a way. Another tip that I think is kind of not talked about that often is researching your own specific diaspora community, because chances are they took their own folk magic practices from Germany with them when they immigrated, and they likely had to adapt their practices for the new environment that they found themselves in. So if you research your diaspora, you might already get some practices which are related to the land that you currently find yourself in, so you don't have to do as much legwork yourself and trying to translate German folk magic into your new area. And for South German folk magic resources, I can recommend Ella Harrison, which is a fellow creator. She currently lives in Bavaria, where she talks about Bavarian folk practices. I think she's in Lower Bavaria, but don't pinpoint me on that. There is also the Witch's Cookery, who doesn't talk about German folk magic that often, but is also from Bavaria. So you could maybe check them out and see if anything they talk about resonates with you. Okay, next question. I am an American who has a lot of German heritage. Hesse, I think Bavaria, and some Swiss. I speak a little German, but not much, sadly. Could you suggest some resources or starting points for me if I want to connect spiritually with my ancestry? Basically, see my previous answer to the other question. But also, if you have specifically Hessian ancestry, I would recommend checking out the stories by the Brothers Grimm. Generally, if you're any form of German folk magic practitioner, I would recommend checking out the Brothers Grimm because they collected stories from all over Germany. But they were specifically from the north of Hesse, so their stories have a slight focus on that area, so I would check those out. And also, just generally, I think it's often underrated, but just go on Wikipedia. Just try to look what's being written there for the Hessians, for the Bavarians, for the Swiss, and try to figure out who are they, who do they originate from, how did they get to the places that they are in right now. This will kind of help you lay a foundation for your research, especially when you go beyond the Wikipedia article and actually look at the sources that are listed below. Also, very underrated in my opinion, tourist websites. So each region and especially each state in Germany will have their own tourist website, usually also available in English, that can help you with your research in the way that they often have information on the local culture there and sometimes even folklore, and this can also be a very valuable resource to you, especially if you ever consider like visiting there. Oh, and lastly, I would say that since your ancestry is mainly in central and southern Germany, that Frau Holle-centric folklore or Perchta-centric folklore would be especially important to your practice, I believe, because this is the area where Frau Holle/Perchta exists for the most part. Okay, next question. Gabikin3882 asks, thank you for your content. You're welcome. I love watching your videos. It helps me feel more connected to Germany. I'm Canadian. My family is from Germany and I speak German, but I was never around German folk magic, so I don't know what words to use or to look up. What are some good online German folk magic resources? Okay, words in German to look up things pertaining to German folklore would generally be, I feel like, Volkskunde, but this word isn't really used anymore in academic spaces today because it kind of has a negative connotation, but oftentimes you'll still find like older articles using this term, so this could also be something for you to look up. So, as I said, Volkskunde, Ethnologie, basically ethnology, Europäische Anthropologie, European anthropology, and Sagen und Legenden aus, meaning fairy tales and legends from. And then you insert your area that you're interested in. There will be online archives for specific states or regions within that state that have writings pertaining to a lot of different topics, but also sometimes local folk practices and stuff. And you can look up those, especially if you speak German, that will help you a lot with that, and they can oftentimes be accessed through the internet, and then you can get these documents as a PDF, for example. And also other online sources where you could look up things pertaining to the topic that you're interested in are JSTOR, De Gruyter, and academia.edu, I think it's called. This is where you can sometimes get really good articles for free, but still remember to thoroughly vet your sources and what authors you take your information from. Okay, last question from The Galactic Grizzly. Is there any indication of when these magical practices started? Are they Christian or older? It's often said that certain traditions or practices are pre-Christian, but I can hardly ever find reliable sources that confirm this. Not to say that older knowledge is better, but I think it's useful to know in which context certain traditions started, so I can better understand them. I love this question. When it comes to many folk magical practices, not just in Germany, but throughout the entirety of Europe, it's often very hard to tell if a practice directly hails from paganism, or if just, for example, a similar practice existed in paganism, then died out, and then got later revived in a more Christian context, or if a practice directly derives from paganism and just got a bit more Christianized over the centuries, or if a practice has basically nothing really to do with ancient forms of paganism, but started developing sometimes in the late medieval period or early new modern period, and just isn't explicitly Christian, because all of these things do happen. We have some accounts, and I just speak for my area now, for example, in the Indiculus. Wait, let me actually grab it. I have it right here. The Indiculus Superstitionorum et Paganarium, which is an account of missionaries who tried to convert the pagan tribe of the Saxons that at the time of conversion mainly lived in northwestern Germany and the northeastern Netherlands. And this is basically just a list of things which were said to be like quite common around the pagan groups which were slowly converted by Christians. And in that we can find things such as worshipping trees or making offerings at springs and stuff. And all of these things also pop up in later church decrees, explicitly forbidding things like making offerings at springs or ancestral graves and stuff. And when we see these things continued and pop up in later folkloric practices continuously, we can kind of assume that they at least had a pagan origin, although the practitioners which later used these practices wouldn't have identified necessarily as pagan. They would have either viewed their originally pagan practices in a new Christian light, or they just wouldn't have thought of their practices as spiritual at all, because there's this dichotomy that often exists in folk magic between the officially religious life, which is like very Christian and centered around the church, and then the practical side of things, which can include things which we today would judge as spiritual, but back then would have just been like the things we do. So yeah, you really have to go by a case-by-case basis with this, and even then you can oftentimes not really make a sound argument for one or the other. I'm remembering a tradition that is especially common in southern Germany and the Alpine regions that involves like mummers and other people putting on very elaborate face masks and coverings of the body, and then going on processions through the village, oftentimes in a very like wild and destructive manner. And there are accounts of Romans who invaded the Alpine regions, seeing similar practices there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this practice is millennia old and hails back to the ancient past. And even if it did, the practice over time will have changed so much in general conception of it that it's not really fair to say that this is like 100% explicitly pagan. So I know this answer might be a bit frustrating, but that's sadly just the reality that us researchers find ourselves in. And with that, we are through with, I believe, every question. If you sent a question that I didn't see it or I didn't answer it in this video, feel free to comment again and I'll do my best to answer that in my next Q&A, or just write you a personal message or something like that. And with that, I wish you a great rest of your day, and I'll hope to see you in the next one. 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔶𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔫 Hallo? Hallo? Hä, was ist das? Dankeschön. Mein Gott.